think language has always been a massive part of what I've done. I grew up speaking Irish in Derry, and then whenever I moved to Scotland, I moved when I was 14, so one of the biggest things was just kind of, like, it was a completely different culture, but straight away I got into the Gaelic side of things, and I found language is a really nice way of sort of finding a home away from home. And I've always wanted to, I think because I've been torn between both languages and speaking them both, I've always wanted to create something that brings them both together. So it's always been in the back of my mind to actually put them in conversation with each other, and actually there's not that many people really doing it. I feel like Ireland sort of has an awareness of Scottish Gaelic, and Scottish Gaelic has an awareness of Irish, but I think there's a project called Chéile that does funding between the two, but apart from that. So I think I just always wanted to create something that put those languages in conversation with each other in a fun, playful way, but also in a realistic way as well, like not just a kind of falsely constructed scenario. So I hope that's what I've done.
That connection between the two similar languages is so critical in your film, in drawing out the identities of the characters.
I suppose I just wrote it as with languages, those two languages were such a key part of it, but I never really thought about expressing it in that sense of going, well, it's going to communicate this or communicate that. I just always thought, actually just having them both speaking different languages and saying, like, I feel the expressiveness just comes out naturally. So I don't really know. It's so funny watching up on the TV and hearing where people laugh and how people sort of view them, because I don't really think I write it with, I'm not going, this is really going to express Irish, this is really going to express Gaelic. But yeah, it's interesting how it comes across on the screen. But yeah, I don't really know if I'm conscious when I write about that.
Thinking about the two young actors in your film, who both say in the film that they don't feel they speak the language very well, but obviously they are speaking quite fluently in what we see. I wonder what it was like working with them, what kind of their level was.
Well, so David, who's the Gaelic speaker, is really interesting because he's doing a PhD in chemistry or something, and his dad was Scottish and his mum was from Ireland, so his mum had Irish, so he had a weird kind of mix of the two, but was very, very good Gaelic speaker. And then Sean, who's actually my cousin, sort of is a very loose Irish learner, but he's a French speaker as well, so a lot of it was working with him on the vocab and just kind of, but he, like, even like joch, I would try and get him to say like a drink, but he would like put on a little French, like joch, and I'd really going like, that's completely wrong, and he couldn't hear it. But no, it was just interesting, like, working. I think that was the difference though, is that you had the two actors spoke a bit of the languages, and that was really good, but a lot of the production team didn't. Like, my cinematographer was Spanish and was really, really good, but I think there's a real difference between having the actors, like having a production team that speaks Irish and is working through Irish on like other short films that I've done, and then having a bigger team that sort of, then suddenly you're working between like English to Gaelic to Irish, and it's just this constant translation, which is really interesting. Again, sort of stops you and makes you pause and take time over things, but I just thought that was interesting. But just on the comment about like how important young people are, I just feel like this is probably coming from a Scottish Gaelic perspective more than an Irish, but there's like a real negativity around, there's two narratives that are quite strong. One is that the language is just so twee and so good and is perfect, and we're creating these kind of quite lovely films, but that don't actually tell the truth around the language. And the other narrative is just that it's dying and there's no kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think what young people do is they just create, they just make and create, and whether that's a negative thing or a positive thing, there's just so much creation amongst young people at the moment. And I think even that, just the nuance of not having those two big narratives that I think the older generation are pushing, either it's like 100% positive or really, really negative. And I think young people are really able to balance like the in-between space.
What kind of things did you do in the production of your films, or what were you sort of thinking about in ensuring that these didn't become things that were too siloed and that felt like they were only specifically geared at people who speak the language, and made sure that they felt welcoming to people who are just interested in learning about the language or seeing something that's working with it?
Again, I don't think I was like too conscious. I just really wanted a story that was compelling, that people would watch. And so it was like, the narrative will hopefully hold its own in that space. And even with like, to me, if I strip it back, and it's nice that it's been screened now, but at the heart of what I wanted was just a film that put Irish and Gaelic in conversation with each other. And I was like, if I can do that in a creative way, that actually is just like a semi-decent film that can be screened, like, that's a success. So I don't think I was necessarily conscious. I knew whenever I was looking for a cinematographer, I was like asking people, and there's this one guy who was like, would they actually even be able to understand each other? And I think there's a bit of, I don't know, creative liberty within that. But even then, like, if the questions that they ask could be interpreted differently, and I think they would actually be able to have a conversation. But I think I just really wanted a compelling narrative, that a good story, and then I thought actually then the languages can hold that space, and the languages actually help create that story. So it's not really, I guess, the only bit of accessibility that I did have was I had a screening, and someone who used BSL came up and asked me, he was going, well, I totally I couldn't understand that one of them was speaking in Gaelic, one of them was speaking in Irish, and I was going, it was just something I just was so not aware of, that within it you have to tell who's speaking what language when, if people are relying really, really heavily on the subtitles. So that was an interesting sort of feedback. But no, I just think you tell the story, and hopefully people then, maybe it's different for other people. In terms of funding, I think I got, well, mine's from a director's perspective, where I'd always written scripts and given them to other people to make, and I'd always say I'm a writer first and a director. But then I wrote the script, and I was going, I'm going to have to go find a director who speaks Gaelic and Irish, and it's not going to work. So I was like, I'd love to be able to tell the story. And every time someone developed a script, it wouldn't be what was in my head. So I was like, I'd love to be able to just like really focus on a project myself. But then it wasn't until I got funding. It was like, when I say funding, it was like £850 from Colin Kill. So it wasn't that much. But once someone sort of backs you and invests a certain amount, to put a lot of pressure on to have a finished product, and then somehow having a finished product built up, suddenly had this big team and this massive plan. So I think it's so important to be held accountable and to have that money to actually force you to do it as well. Because I sat on that script for like 2 years of going, maybe I should develop it, or maybe I shouldn't. As soon as someone was like, yeah, we can see what you want to do, here's a bit of money, I was like, oh, okay. And the other thing was, I think so much of it's how much, I come from a marketing background, so a bit of it was like how much you can market it. And I think in my head I was always like, I'll be able to push this narrative of like the first like narrative short in Irish and Gaelic, but I just need to make a really good product. Like, I know I can sell this if I make a good product. So that was sort of a driving force behind making the film as well. I was actually here last year for the Celtic Media Festival, was here. There's a really good talk on AI and filmmaking. It was really terrifying. They like recorded this guy in the room and then could dub in French, like what he was saying. And the way that they're using now, kind of, whenever they, like, dubbing's becoming such a massive thing of that, and they can change it with AI, that it like looks as if you're speaking English, even though the actor was, there's lots of kind of, it's terrifying what's happening with AI, but also quite interesting in terms of who can make stuff. But they said something, I can't remember what the line was, but that like sort of minority language films are going to become more about culture than the language itself, kind of about representing the culture that's coming from, and that they're really like, they're more kind of acts of politics and acts of kind of language rather than actually speaking the language fluently itself. And I think that's such a, like, to me, it's the stories that they enable and the stories that they're telling and that originality that comes through it, that actually the language, sometimes I feel that too much is focused on the language, like, this is an Irish language film, this is a Scottish Gaelic film, and it's actually, no, this is a story told through that language. And I think sometimes then, like, the idea that AI can just create, yeah, maybe AI can't, like, we can use Google Translate now to have a conversation in emails with people who don't even speak, I don't know, Scottish Gaelic, can have a conversation, but it's kind of the stories behind that, I think. So I'm not, I think AI is kind of interesting in what it's doing, but I think there's more thought going on behind what we're actually using it for, if that makes sense.